Jordan Klepper is not behind a desk in New York City anymore. He's sinking in a boat with environmental protesters in a Louisiana bayou. He's packing moving boxes with one of the nation's first Native American congresswomen in New Mexico, and he's posting bail at the Fulton County Jail. In Comedy Central's new docuseries, Klepper leaves the comfort of the studio and embeds on the front lines of America's push for change. So please join me in welcoming Jordan Klepper.
Hey, everybody. Well, good to see you
Yeah,
again.
good to see you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is very exciting. Okay, so Jordan, we've known you as a correspondent on The Daily Show.
Yes.
You were the satirical character, Jordan Klepper, the host of The Opposition. And now we know you as the creator and host of your newest series, Klepper, which is just about to wrap up season 1. So tell us more about the Klepper docuseries.
Yeah, so yes, you've known me in so many different ways.
So many ways.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to work at some great shows and during a very weird time in American history, if you will, especially if you're coming at it from like a political comedy standpoint. A lot has happened over the last 5 years. And so I did The Opposition, where I was this character who was far right, kind of lampooning Alex Jones, InfoWars, Breitbart perspective, which was fun and dark. He's in the news today, though. I don't know if you saw that. He's sending child pornography to the lawyers of Sandy Hook victims. That was literally a story this morning.
Wow.
So
yeah.
it's hard to kind of go larger than some of the actual things that happen.
Right. Yeah.
And we were looking. We stopped that show and we got to do another show. And I wanted to do a show that was out doing field work. I really enjoy getting out in the field.
Yeah.
There's a lot of late night shows right now with people behind desks doing a great job behind desks. And this felt like an opportunity. Like, let's go out and comment and see some of these stories up close.
Very cool.
And what we found ourselves doing was quite literally a docu-series. You know, with the Daily Show, I play a character, I'm heightened, and when you're on the Daily Show, you're ironic, your satire, your angle kind of comes from that distance, that irony. You play the bad guy, and we kind of wanted to challenge ourselves here to drop that as a tool and just sort of be earnest out in the field, and from that, hopefully find some humor, but also highlight some real stories. I think coming from the world of The Opposition or what have you, we started to feel like there was enough chaos and fabrication in the world that maybe we could use a little bit more reality, and so the doc world kind of felt like a good fit for us.
That's awesome. And in the whole series, Klepper, you're covering a lot of really interesting and heavy topics. You know, some of them include U.S. veterans getting deported.
Hilarious stuff.
Hilarious.
All
yes, very,
we were
very
like,
funny.
Let's find the funniest topics out there. Vets dealing with PTSD.
Yeah. Space exploration, maybe a little more,
Sure.
you know, fun. But and even an underground university for immigrants in Georgia. So you're doing all this work as a comedian. How do you balance that, the humor with the seriousness of a lot of these topics? Is that at the top of your mind when you're out in the field, when you're planning these episodes?
Sure, I think like, I think humor is an interesting frame to approach anything with. I think it's a little off kilter and that allows people to see other characters or other stories in the light they might not normally see. But it's also a challenge. I would say The Daily Show had a blueprint for the way in which it tells stories. And I think when we let that go and went out there, we very quickly realized like we have to answer the question why a comedian is doing these serious stories. And not that they aren't important, but also like why me? What can we, the show, bring to a story like this? And so it was very much a challenge. There were times we came back and we were like, what are we trying to tell here? Why are we telling these stories? And I think what we started to find is the humor can come from my journey. I mean,
Sure.
Obviously it sounds a little self-serving, but it is a show called Klepper, so perhaps that's my brand. But I think like it was like I'm not a journalist, and to be very clear, we use the work of great journalists to find our stories, to use our stories to build off of them. We're calling them so that we get it right. But I think what you have right now is you have a lot of people who are curious about what's happening in America. A lot of people are curious about what they can do, and a lot of people do that from home. I found myself doing that from home in front of a computer. But I wanted to see what those front lines looked like.
Yeah.
And those front lines are tough. It's a hard journey. And I think a lot of the humor came from kind of a nice guy who might be ill-equipped to be on those front lines. And hopefully, like, I heard someone say this once, hopefully I can kind of be like the avatar for the viewer through these stories. And so if you are somebody who's curious about environmentalism and want to see what's happening on the front lines of climate change, and there's people locking themselves to pipelines, that's an extreme thing. I've only read about that thing. I went there, I got in the boat, I spent the night with the pipeline protesters. You get in fights, the boat sinks, it's difficult. Sure. I bitch and moan most of the time. I think when we came back and we started to look at that, we're like, oh, the humor lies not in us fabricating the experience, right, but let's highlight how difficult this experience is, not to the detriment of what the story they're trying to tell, but showing like, yeah, change is hard. It doesn't mean it's not worthwhile, but I think we could find humor in articulating how difficult it can be.
Sure. So you mentioned the scenario where you're on the Louisiana Bayou.
Yeah, sunk in a boat.
4 a.m. and you're, going down. And was there ever a time that you would say to yourself, what am I doing here? Or why am I doing this?
All the time.
All
yes.
the time. Okay.
Yes. Most of the time.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Let me be very clear. I can speak fairly articulate about like the higher aims and goals of this, but most of the time I'm bitching about why I'm not back behind a desk.
Right.
It was really nice to be behind a desk. Studios are so wonderful. They're air conditioned. You have audiences who are told to laugh at your jokes.
Sure.
They give you expensive suits. They light you really well from the angle that makes you look good and not weird. And you don't stay on La Quinta Inns fighting for breakfast every morning. So yeah, repeatedly, I was continuously balancing that. I mean, this show, I loved making this show. Like, joking aside, you can't help but be inspired by some of the people I was with. I didn't agree with everybody I was out there with, but like it was inspiring to see students who are fighting to be heard and fighting to go to class, and to see environmental protests, sometimes doing tactics that I don't agree with, but like putting their bodies on the line. But I don't feel very comfortable sometimes out in the real world. And I think like the Bayou was a good example. Like we went there with them, and I think that was also an example of us learning how to make a documentary. The Daily Show, you come at it kind of knowing the story you're going to tell. When you do something that's a whole piece, you don't. You go out with an assumption, but that usually gets thrown out. And like we were there in the Bayou, they changed the whole plan. Suddenly we find ourselves sleeping there, waking up at 2 a.m., getting in a car, driving an hour to the Bayou, and then it's like 3:30. You get in boats at the Bayou. People forgot to bring flashlights, and it's pitch black. We're in the middle of nowhere, and we're driving down the Bayou. It's an hour to get to the pipeline site. The end goal is for these people to arrive at the pipeline site, get on the site, lock themselves to the pipe to stop workage for the day, and hopefully delay the effects on the environment. So it's an intense day. We arrive there around 5. And there's a police boat there. And we haven't seen a boat for an hour. We're literally on the Bayou. We're driving along, quiet, nervous, uncomfortable. You're seeing little gators pop up as you're driving along. And there's a police boat that pops up, and they panic and they go by. The police boat starts to chase us. They do a turn into it, and there's a wake, and suddenly the boat hits the wake, the water comes into the boat, and we go down. And they hightail it. You go right to the side. We're literally sinking as we're heading to the side. We go in the water. I get hit by a branch as we get there. Suddenly, $15,000 worth of equipment is floating in the bayou. We're swimming and grabbing it, throwing it on board, and then climbing up. And as we're climbing up, also they're freaked out because they were going to do something that was potentially illegal.
Sure.
There's obviously a police or security presence there, and so they're all there hiding from these police boats as it goes on. And we managed to get one camera working, and we're recording this. And I think like we found ourselves in a shit situation.
To put it mildly.
To put it mildly. And I think like I was very uncomfortable. I dropped making jokes and trying to find humor in there, and I was mad at the mismanagement. Sure. I was nervous because we couldn't. The plans were all to shit, and we had a sat phone that wasn't working. We are way out there, and there's guys with literal machetes. They brought machetes, not to be violent, but because you're in the bayou, use machetes to get through the foliage. And so they all have camouflage on and machetes, and they're worried about a police presence getting in the bayou. And so it's nerve-wracking. It's like I was an improv teacher 10 years ago. like, what am I doing
with
here?
This situation? Yeah.
But then we come back and we watch that footage. Like it was like honestly, that episode, it was our second one we started to film. We thought we were going to do a funny, like, sketch element in the bayou. That would be a hilarious third act to this whole story. And we had the best laid plans to make this story go. When we come back, and that's not what we got. But we watch it, and we're like, and also we wanted to amplify these protesters who were amazing. Although as you get out there, I empathize with their cause, and most of them are doing it for the right reasons, and some of them are not. And I left definitely wanting them to be better at what they were doing. And there were other episodes we ran into people who were better prepared to make a difference in their activism as opposed to just make a splash, if you will.
Right.
And so it wasn't until we watched that footage and we were laughing at me complaining there. And we were also watching a string out, and we weren't watching like, oh, where's the next joke? What's the next thing you want to tell us? We were watching because it was compelling. It was nerve-wracking. It was unique. And it was like a portrait of imperfect protest. And in that moment, we're like, oh, I think that's the show. Let's not try to come up with some goofball ender here. Like, let's let it be maybe dramatic. Let's let it be weird. Let's let me be uncomfortable and let the audience take away what they will from that. And so I think the moments I'm most proud of in the series are where we show, hopefully, that, which, again, essentially is us doing a documentary as opposed to us doing a satirical piece.
Very cool. So you went in having an idea of maybe how the series would go, and then in moments like that, you know, I'm assuming you planned out all the episodes. Did that immediately change the way you looked at how we're going to film the next one?
It did. We continued to shift. Like, the first episode we shot was with Deported Veterans, and I think that was a learning curve as well. Like, it's a harrowing story. It's veterans who fought for this country. And they committed a crime, they did their time, and when they came out, they were kicked out. They assumed they were already citizens, but everyone had different stories, through not getting paperwork, being told something fell through, they weren't officially citizens, which you are entitled to if you fight for this country. They were deported into Mexico, and there's a place called the Bunker where a lot of these deported veterans come just to find community. And this was a harrowing story to us, and we hadn't heard of it. We literally had a pitch sheet where you pitch the ideas, the things you care about, and then you pitch like why we should do this story. And literally the line was just deported fucking veterans. And so I was like, that's
Which that
crazy
sounds
to me.
compelling.
It sounds compelling.
Yeah,
so it's like deported fucking veterans. All right, let's go tell that story. But we go down there. It's our first thing we're filming. We're following a guy who's traveling the country trying to bring attention to it. And I'm still a little bit in this character who I've done stuff, Daily Show in the Opposition, where you kind of come in and you get to be the dick in some ways. Like you play naive and dumb so that they can fill in their intelligence and fill in the gaps in between.
Yeah.
And when you walk into a bunker full of veterans who fought for this country, who are hundreds of miles away from their families, it's not funny.
Right.
And it shouldn't be. And I think we realize that right away. Now we realize that by panicking, being like, we're on Comedy Central.
Right. What are we doing?
It was like I don't know where the humor is here. And I think we started to continue to imagine what the show was. It was like, well, that's okay. I think we can let this be this story. Let's be creative in the way we tell the story to find humor in it, but let's also free ourselves up to let these be different types of stories and also get a different rhythm to what you're used to watching on like a Daily Show episode. And so that continued to happen throughout the episodes. And then as we started picking more and more things near the end of the season, we became more confident in knowing that if you trust an idea and a story, like as long as there's an action happening or I'm a part of something, then we can find humor in that. And that was a big thing in choosing. Like there's many great stories to tell, but we didn't want it just to be me sitting in a chair talking to somebody.
Right.
We wanted it to be put me in a boat, put me in a vomit comet, put me in a protest. Like I wanted to be there along the way, so it's not recollection, it's action.
Right. And do you think that approach also kind of helped the viewer, learn more about what the actual situation was?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I think wherever we can help the viewer, you know, that's the helping hand of a naive guy. I think, I do think, I'm coming from my own perspective, which is again, I'm curious about these worlds. Sure. I'm passionate about these topics. But if I'm being totally blunt about it, like, but I'm not out there. I go to some marches, but I'm not out there spending the night tying myself to pipelines. I'm not out there doing all of those things. We also talked a lot about like privilege. I had to address the fact I'm a white guy with a TV show. That's a lucky thing to have. I'm a white guy on TV who's going into these places. Like, I don't want to be the white savior who's going to come in and fix these causes.
Right.
But I don't think that delegitimizes the experience, but I think you have to ask that question. It's like, all right, I'm going to be a white guy who goes into these spaces, who has privilege in these spaces. Let's talk about that. And the episodes I'm most proud of, like, we have conversations about that, or I'm a part of trying to do something and I'm not good at it, or I maybe have a little bit of success there. And I think there's an audience probably at home who is asking similar questions about, like, what does change look like? What does it take to make action that could enable change? And how do people grapple with those questions? Which is, again, it might be a lot to put into a 22-minute show on Comedy Central. But I think as we went out there, we're like, we have to be honest about the questions we're having making this and not just gloss over it.
And you actually did ask all those questions, if I remember correctly, in that the episode Invisible Nation.
Yeah.
And the really cool thing, apologies for any spoiler alerts, is you ended that episode by giving the lens to somebody you were interviewing.
Yeah. That was so this was a story, we read an amazing article. There's this woman named Crystal Echohawk who did research on Indigenous people and the experience of Native Americans in media. And long story short, we do a bad job of representing Native Americans in media and in entertainment. Mm-hmm. We either don't represent them or we represent them and all the images look like Native Americans from before 1900. Yeah. The report also looks out, there's no representation in history books and all sorts of things. And so in reading that report, that is criticizing media and entertainment. And we were looking at this and we're like, we're in media entertainment, so let's try to tell this story. Yeah. And then in telling this, because I'm kind of the guy who's going to go through it, I bring in my history. I was in a thing called Indian Guides, which was like Boy Scouts for, as I say, it was like somehow even whiter than the Boy Scouts. But it's you in Kalamazoo, Michigan, you dress as a Native American, you meet with your father and a bunch of other fathers and their children, and then you do powwows and things of that nature. To be honest, I had never gave it a second thought. It was a thing that about a decade ago kind of got weaned out because it was perhaps inappropriate. So we were like, great, I've been part of this problem and I've been naive to it. Let's try to tell that story. And again, this was an example of like, we thought we knew how we were going to tell this story. Sure. We thought this, like, in our little Manhattan studio before we figured out, it's like, all right, we're going to cover Native American invisibility. We're going to do it in a comedic way. So we're going to take my story of, I want to kind of repent and figure out how to be a good ally in this situation. I'm going to talk to Crystal Echohawk. I'm going to talk to Native American Congresswoman Deb Haaland. I'm going to talk to some artists and try to show different representation. And I'm going to end with me like repenting for being a part of Indian Guides and for me learning and seeing what a 2019 Indian Guides would look like. And so that's what we walk out with. Yeah. But then you start talking to people and you start realizing the problem that a lot of the folks in the indigenous communities have are like, the problem is white people for years have been telling our story. Exactly. Which is weird when you're a white guy attempting to tell their story. But again, that's the reality. Sure. And so we had to engage with that. And I think driving back from the airport, talking to a guy, an artist named Chanupa Hanska, Chanupa was very blunt and was like, you need to weaponize your privilege. Yeah. You can come in here and you can talk to me and you can try to understand, but you have a pulpit, see what you can do with that. And that was a very profound thing to hear. And I heard that repeatedly throughout filming these episodes. And we were driving back to the airport, getting ready to maybe produce this thing that was funny in New York 2 weeks earlier. Right. But we're like, this is not our story to end on me having redemption through Indian Guides. It kind of grew bigger than that. It grew bigger than that. So let's call this out and let's give the ending of this story over to Chanupa to end it however he would want. And we'll call out the fact that ain't gonna fix everything, giving somebody a minute and a half. But it's a start. But it's a start. And I think like, and maybe that's all we could aim to do with these things, but and let's aim to be more improvisational in understanding what's happening and let that end the story as opposed to the thing that's clever back in Manhattan. So going back to the episode on Deported Bats, what I really liked is
how you, and actually throughout the whole series, were able to bring in a variety of different perspectives. And in this episode, as you alluded to, it wasn't exactly a funny topic. But what you did do was you ended up interviewing a former ICE agent. And in that interview, you used some really good techniques in terms of this is a person who is not sympathetic to veterans in that situation. And during the interview, he actually you asked him to define what it meant to be an American. And he called out different aspects of that. And then you were able to just bluntly point out like those were the same qualities in these veterans that were actually being deported. So how do you actually prepare for interviews like that with people who have very different opinions than you?
Well, I think going back from like the work of the Daily Show, when we have people that we're talking to, we're doing research, we're reading what they've written, their television appearances, and then we also producers will do pre-interview interviews to kind of be aware of where they're at. Now,
you do some recon.
What's that? We do some recon. Yeah, so you do your research to know like where are we coming from and what have you. This show was a balance of do all of your research, but then spend more time so we get organic things that are happening within that moment. And so I think like he was a Fox talking head and still is, and so I know the arguments that he made, and I think you walk into an interview like that prepared knowing the arguments that he's going to make and perhaps the arguments you might make back at him. I think what is a little bit different here was like we weren't just interested in slamming this person for perhaps being somewhat unfair or prejudiced against immigrants or veterans specifically. What we knew is like, I've heard you talk about veterans. I've heard you talk about the America that you want to see. And coming from being in Tijuana, talking to veterans, they're the same conversations. And that was an example of like, we are in Tijuana and I'm talking to veterans, and they are much more patriotic about the country than I am. I walk into the bunker and the bunker is full of flags, American tchotchkes as far as you can see. And the way they talk about the country that they defend, it's beautiful. And they talk about they would lay down their life to this day for that country. That is something a lot of people that I know, they don't have that kind of love. There's a lot of cynicism there. And I see true patriotism in these veterans. And they're veterans who have been shamed by their country. They're veterans who are not allowed in their country. The fucked up thing about deported vets, the only way they can get back in is when they die. When they die, they're allowed to be buried in America. So you can be a dead vet in America, but you can't be a live one. And that's fucked up.
It is.
And they love them. The way they talk about America is the way I wish I could talk about America. And it's the way a lot of pundits on the right talk about America as a tool to get the things that they want. And I think when I see that on Fox, it feels like bullshit because it's an attempt to use patriotism to often invert that. It's like, I want to talk about a community and place that we love, and if I can get you behind this, you're not going to pay attention to the ways that we use fear and hate. That's bullshit. But the idea is nice, and I think if you call them on those ideas, if you call them on the America that they are fighting for, and you can show connections to the America that people have fought for and are trying to hold up, like, I hope you can find a little bit of common ground on point of view and not just on good guy, bad guy. Most like good ideas, there's two different folks who have those ideas. Can we focus on that?
And think about that, So in some of the situations you were in different episodes, you were very committed to causes that you were covering. And most notably, perhaps, was that you even got arrested for trespassing a Board of Regents meeting where you were standing up for undocumented immigrants who wanted to pursue higher education. Did you ever regret your level of involvement? Was it something that you felt evolved in the series? Like, did you feel close to some of these issues?
Yeah, I think that episode was an aberration. I think we talked a lot about how involved in each story I should be. Because I think it's very I think it's limiting and it's insincere if I just go in and then I'm standing with you. I'm there. Sure. I'm here for 3 days and I'm a fighter just like you. I think that's
defeats the point of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And also like this is their fight. I want to go there. I want to see how committed folks are, how difficult it is. But I don't want to be a champion of all those causes, but I want to learn about those causes.
Yeah.
And I cover like gun rights with like open carry groups, which I don't support constitutional carry and some of the things that they fight for. But I'm curious in their passion, and so for all of those who are like, I want to get up there with you, I want to walk a mile in those shoes, but they're your shoes. You articulate that, and I'll be along for the ride. What happened in Georgia is these were students who are undocumented students, DACA students, who just want to go to college, and they make that incredibly difficult for students who are DACA and undocumented there. And they don't have a voice. And as I spent multiple weekends with them, you're in Atlanta, and Atlanta is a town that has a rich history. They learn the history of the civil rights movement and what direct action looks like, and how activism, what it was articulated as, is it's not a choice. It's the way in which they amplify their voice. They need to take. This is what civil disobedience is. This is what taking direct action is. It's an amplification of a voice that sometimes is not heard. And they had a plan for the way in which they did that. And the plan was based on what Martin Luther King did, the writings that he did, the movement within the civil rights movement, and how people moved within that. And so as I spent my time there, and they were ready to take a direct action, like, we kind of crossed and broke a rule for our show, which was like, there is an opportunity where I could stand with these students. This show, normally I would step back, but I do there's a camera, it's on me, it will get news. If I don't do it,
for what you do.
yes, if I don't do it, it'll get less news. And the purpose of this is to draw attention to it. And so at that moment it was like, yes, I'm drawn to this cause, I believe in this cause. I'm there for a short amount of time, but if I can use the little bit of attention that I have for good in that situation, then by all means it was worth it there. And so, yeah, I think it's a careful thing. I think you have to be careful with that. You know, if we keep doing more episodes, the goal isn't for me to come in and be like, I am here, I'm gonna get locked up. The goal is to show that like America's full of fighters on all sides. I think that American spirit is inspiring. But when you're fucking with kids in Georgia who just want to go to college, you cross the line.
Who just want to go to college and then contribute back to their...
Honestly, and you talk to a lot of these students, and they want to go to college. All of the jobs that they want they don't want to go to college to become a comedian on television. They want to go to college to become nurses, to become teachers, to give back to a community. Honestly, it's a thing that I saw again and again. Talking to people who are disenfranchised by this country with such a desire to be a part of it and to give back, like, it's like these students who have DACA, who are treated as second-class citizens here in America, who are trying to hide from public view because they're afraid they're going to be kicked out, literally watching Donald Trump throw them under the bus day in and day out. You ask these students what they want to do, they want to be nurses.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, in my community, I want to be a bilingual nurse because I have an aunt who went to the hospital once and couldn't communicate when she was sick. Like, that's what they fucking want to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's infuriating. And I think I think they should be having the voice. There's so many voices out there right now. If we can amplify some more of those voices and maybe quiet down some of the other ones, there's going to be a little bit more hope that there is an America worth fighting for. We shouldn't just be working against it.
Well, thank you for that episode, because I definitely think it helps with addressing misrepresentation and stuff on that. I am going to ask you, though, how was it spending 12 hours in the county jail?
Oh boy, it's they make you, they see if you have something in your ass right away, like right away. Like right away. you go in, and it was me, honestly, it was the weirdest day. We have, and I'm arrested with faith leaders in town because they have other people. They know if you wear a collar, there's a better chance they're not going to mess with you. So a lot of faith leaders like, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to bring attention to this. So it's me, a bunch of priests, a few teachers. We get arrested, and then you walk on in there with the pastors. They line you up, and then they walk you into a room where the door is held open by a guy. You walk into that room, you give over your clothes. They put your clothes there. They make you cough twice over a drain. Twice. Okay. That's apparently industry standard for. Yeah, if you guys are thinking about sneaking something into jail in your rectum, all you have to do is practice beyond the 2 coughs, and you're going to be totally fine.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll make a mental note.
That's mentally what. And then after that, it's mostly bureaucracy. You're mostly killing time and boredom. They move you from cell to cell. You fill out the same forms over and over again. They try to humiliate you with the way in which you use the restroom over and over again. The fun, weird detail from that episode, which we don't even talk about in the episode, ended up spending most of that time with one of these pastors from Atlanta, and I had met that pastor a decade earlier. He was my grandmother's pastor at her church in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
That's
she brought me
small world.
in. It was a small world, yeah. She brought me in to meet Pastor Matt a decade ago because I'm an atheist kid who was maybe not the grandson she wanted. She was like, you should meet Pastor Matt. He's a good guy. And fast forward a decade later, and Pastor Matt is a good guy. He's standing up for things in Atlanta,
Verified,
Georgia.
yeah.
Verified good guy.
Wow, that's really cool. So yeah, you kind of alluded to before, these episodes that you air are only 22 minutes long.
Yeah.
That's a really short amount of time, and you pack a lot of content in there. Was it challenging to decide what you wanted to focus on in these episodes?
Yeah, I think like with anything, you shoot a lot and you talk to a lot of people, and there's sadly a lot of stuff that gets left on the cutting room floor when you're crafting a story for the 22-minute time limit. I think, if we get to continue to do more and more episodes of it, I think it's the type of thing that you want to make sure you give space. I think a rule that we used to always have on the Daily Show and what have you, you shoot as much as you can, and you never, when you come back, you need to reevaluate what you have. I think Undocumented You is a great example of like, I wish that was an hour-long episode. I wish that was more, because you spend time going home with some of these students. You spend time going out with these students. You see some of the stresses that they have traveling to and from places. And so, yeah, like no matter what story you tell, you are only telling a fraction of it. And so that's a difficult decision you have to consistently make whenever you're kind of making any piece of content.
Yeah. The really cool thing, though, too, is that you also have a podcast, the Klepper Podcast, and it looks like you've aligned the podcast episodes with some of the Klepper docuseries episodes, and you were able to bring in, people who worked on the show, other, experts in a field like Bill Nye. What was it like to interview Bill Nye? By
Science guy?
Yeah.
Oh man, he's way into science. I tell you, that guy. that guy's a sweetheart into science.
Awesome.
Honestly, what is science is such a broad topic to be an expert on.
Yeah.
But it's amazing a guy like that to come in to articulate the things that he cares about. And I mean, he's been making a lot of news recently because he's so adamant about the things we need to do to prevent the effects of climate change.
Yeah.
And so he was great to come in. I think we need more people like that who can draw attention and boil down big issues into something that's digestible.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the purpose of the podcast. You can, I feel the way I watch television now is I watch it, if I like it, I get online and then I read its Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
Is this true? Is this not true? I want to know more, what have you. And I think the podcast was like, great, let's create the Wikipedia page verbally. If people like this episode, we'll talk to you about how we made it, the decisions we made, the things we thought were interesting. We'll maybe expand on things we left out. We'll talk about the difficulties. One of my favorite pieces of, as we all know, everybody's trying to figure out what content looks like in 2019. Is it television? Is it a thing you watch on your phone? Is it podcast? I don't know anymore. But I think a thing that is unique, we did an episode on gun rights, but more specifically, we followed two groups, a white group and a black group. Myself and Kobe LeBee followed these two groups, and it was to see how they were reacted to in Texas, open carrying based on what race you are, essentially. It was a really difficult story to tell, and I think we ran up against having 22 minutes and trying to tell a story on Comedy Central that's 22 minutes long about these two complicated stories. I feel proud of that episode, but I feel even prouder of that podcast was us kind of examining the conversations we had behind the scenes, and the struggles we had in telling what that story is. And so I think one of the thing I'm most excited about is that, like, if you care enough about these things or are curious enough about it, I think there is a lot you can pull from, not only like, look at these two groups, but more like, how do we contextualize the stories that we tell? And is there a better way of doing that? And if art in of itself can be self-reflective in that way, I think you have a better chance of telling a more truthful story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was really cool that you brought Kobe back to actually be part of that podcast episode.
Yeah, I thought it was a good move by me.
Great move, yeah.
Yeah.
With that episode specifically, do you think that your past experience on this topic kind of drove the way you wanted to craft that episode?
For sure, I've done a lot of stuff on the gun control debate, and so I think this was an example of, we didn't want to just do another gun episode. What was curious about this was, it was an Open Carry Texas, which is an all-white group that wants more gun rights, and it was Guerrilla Mainframe, which is an all-African-American group who was using guns as a way to draw attention to police brutality and police shootings in Dallas. So it was more about how they use guns to get attention. And also both of those groups had some hateful stuff they said online and got in trouble for it. C.J. Grisham has said talked some vile things about police officers online. Been criticized for it. He's been roughed up by the police as well. Rakim Balagoon from Guerrilla Mainframe was put on a terrorist watch list because of some comments he made online. And so we were trying to look at beyond like guns. It was more like, these are groups that are using guns to amplify a voice. And they're also using their voice in a way online that is problematic. And so I think for us, this story was really curious because it wasn't just guns are bad, guns are good. It was more like guns are interesting, they draw attention, but what are people saying with the attention they get?
Right, it's a very nuanced topic.
It's a tough topic, and I think like that was for us telling that, trying to get into the weeds of it because that's where the fresh stuff is.
Yeah, very cool. So before we open up for Q&A in a little bit, I just wanted to ask you straight up, what do you want people to get from watching this show?
I mean, I'd like people to see a little bit of hope in the America that is out there. I think I've been a part of shows and things that point out a lot of the problems we have in this country, and I think we do. But I've been lucky enough to go see that there are a lot of people who are out there fighting and trying to change it. And even if you don't agree with the way in which they are trying to change the world, or even the way in which they're trying to craft America, like, it is inspiring to see people care about something enough to take those actions. And so I do hope people walk away with a little bit more insight into those fighters out there beyond just like the thing you might see online.
Yeah. And then with that, so, you know, a lot of people in this room, people watching your show, people watching this interview, you know, might want to do more, right? And they might be engaged with some of the topics that you covered. What do you think they can do to get behind some of these topics that you showcased?
I mean, I think show up.
Show up.
Show up. Where? Google it. Is it a promo here? Can we do it? I think like whether that means at a rally, whether that means at the polling place, whether that means supporting somebody else. Like I think like it's not all political stuff. I think we wanted to look at what activism meant, but we looked at like vets who are dealing with PTSD, and that's a journey that they're dealing with. And I think there's things that can happen on a political sphere that we should be more supportive of, but like what that story was about people dealing with an internal struggle and how they could find a community around that. And so, yeah, I mean, what I was most moved by was like if you can get out of your chair and show up next to somebody, that's a step in the right direction.
Awesome. If anybody has a question, if you want to start lining up.
Line up, folks.
Line up.
Look at that. Oh, he hit a spotlight right there. I love it.
Awesome. Go for it.
Hi. When you're I like the idea of the avatar a lot. So when you're the avatar sort of for the opposition, as the opposition, and you're interviewing people like Trump supporters and people that many people here will not sympathize much with, you in all the scenes on the Daily Show and other places, you cut too early. For me to, it's not that it's bad television. I'm not saying that at all. On the contrary.
Wait, what are you saying? Is it bad television?
I am saying that I would like to see. This is not a criticism, but I wonder what happens afterwards. What do these people think about what they have just gone through? And especially also because you edit a lot. Obviously, you talk to a lot of people and you only show part of those interviews. And so for all of those, what do they take from it? Can you assess that? Share? Well,
specifically with rallies, you're saying? So, like the Trump rallies were, I spent a lot of time at Trump rallies. I hope I never have to go back, but I'll probably go back to 100 more in the next 3 years. Year. Vote, guys, vote. I think like, it's really curious when you talk to people. Honestly, when I was out there was an evolution as to how people treated me. If you let that camera role, and you continued to watch. Some stuff you'd watch is people going into what I was not interested in, echoing the thing that they were going to hear inside the rallies. Donald Trump gave permission to say whatever the hell you wanted to about stuff. He gave permission to say terrible things about Barack Obama being a Muslim and calling Hillary Clinton awful names. And so there was a lot of that. And that became, a lot of the supporters became bolder and bolder in echoing that. Some interviews became contentious. I think like there's a mix. Some are people who were playing on totally different wavelengths. I think like I might be having a conversation that is poking fun of some of their conspiratorial mindsets while they're having a conversation that doesn't see any issue with that. And I think like there weren't a lot of us getting into fights about stuff. If you saw what people will sometimes see videos where I talk to people and be like, oh man, I can't believe you got them on that thing. There was not a moment where they were like, I was gotten. There were a moment where they were like, oh, I was heard. I believe this about this conspiracy. I believe this thing about Hillary Clinton. And even if I pressed it or said that wasn't true, that wasn't a moment where they're like, oh shit, you proved me wrong. It was just sort of like, oh no, we are operating in different wavelengths. So what you would essentially get in a longer video is just sadness that the world around you is not as you wished it would be. Sorry. Next time. I'll give you better TV next time.
All right.
I'm curious, since you've had a chance to meet with so many like these subgroups and kind of activists in many different ways, how has that influenced your perception on American society?
I mean, I think like I've said before, I'm inspired by the fight. As much as I don't like even some of the guys who are, like the Open Carry Texas is a great example. This show allowed me to sit down and have lunch with them, hang out with family members and stuff like that. And I think like deep down there is this American spirit that wants what is good for this country. I think it gets warped and I think it gets diluted and it also just becomes talking points. So Group A yells at Group B for the same things they always yell at one another about. And so I'd like to think that like I walked away from that moved and not, I think 10% less cynical than I was before. The undocumented story that we talked about with those students, like I am a cynic, but when I hear them talk about the things that they are fighting for and eager to be a part of, like I think that is the America that maybe I once thought I was going to be a president in when I was a 12-year-old hoping to be a part of that country. And so I think like you lose some of that cynicism. It's not rocket science. The more time you spend with people, the more you get out of your silos, the less what you're watching on the news or looking at your phone reflects what you actually see. And people don't give, like I'm very much in the media bubble right now. When you work on these shows, all I'm getting is the fights that I'm watching on the cable news channels or the headlines of the news stories that I'm reading. And you go beyond that, and there's so much more people care about. And I think that was reinvigorating to clue in with the other stories and the other conversations that are just beyond the ones that I'm having angrily with my friends here in New York.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, Jordan.
Hello.
So you alluded at the beginning that comedy is all about like heightening, and that's become especially challenging in the last 4 years as things have gotten like crazier and crazier.
Sure.
Have you ever encountered any like news stories or situations that are just so wacky and hilarious on their own that they're just like impossible to squeeze more comedy out of?
I mean, Trump tries. I think, yes, I think that was a consistent issue with the opposition at times. I mean, the things that he does are comical. Some of the lies, some of the tweets, some of the perspectives felt insane, like Hillary Clinton body doubles, stuff like this. Like, again, if you go comedy as math, you find something somebody is doing, you find what seems to be odd or bullshit about it, and then you hide it into a degree that points out what is already what you see as asinine about it. And I think with the Trump administration, there was no room to expand beyond that, and everybody saw it. They're just sort of like, you're going to start a war with Iran, and you're going to misspell people's name, and then you're going to, what was the one he talked about? the Prince of Wales was something he talked recently. So I think like consistently we ran up against the incredible prowess of Donald Trump, who was like UCB level 5 kind of president. So at that point, you either go to complete absurdity or you have to find sort of another tactic.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's take one from this side.
Hey, Jordan.
Hello.
So I think that like I watch The Daily Show every single day. I loved you on that, and I think it was a really good way these past couple of years to be able to digest the news without being so completely overwhelmed by everything that was going on. I also think like within The Daily Show, we get doses of international news and things like that, and there's obviously a lot of issues in the country, but there's also a lot of issues that people aren't as aware internationally. Is there any discussion in taking this kind of concept to a more like broader international topic, like investigating some of those issues?
I think so. So Desi Lydic from The Daily Show did a special on women's issues abroad, which I think was a great way of like just getting a little bit of context on this is how we think we're handling these issues here, how are they dealing with things in Iceland, and what have you. I think this type of series would do well abroad, partially because I would love to travel. Spent a lot of time in Texas. I love Texas, but boy, it'd be nice to go to the south of France and really dig into how they're handling the climate change debate. But I think it's always good. Honestly, step outside your bubble, and that very much includes America. I do think Desi was a great example where it was like, what are they doing in Iceland to deal with like maternity issues? And it just, it pulls your head out of your ass for just a second to see that. So I think wherever we can get some empathy towards people who are not our neighbors, the better.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I guess I'm asking the obvious question, which is what's next? You've been on some of these adventures, and are you now going back to a desk, or are you going to, in fact, go to the south of France?
Well, you know, ideally I can go to the south of France. I wonder if I'll do much comedian there. No, so I mean, the goal for this is, you know, we just finished this season. We're going to wrap this thing up this week. I'd love to continue telling stories like this. I think as I get older, I want to engage more with things and be less removed. And so whatever I can do to be a part of that and to actually experience it. I'm a very lucky guy. My job allows me to go meet inspiring people and be around and be inspired by them. I don't think I'm nearly as interesting as half the people I talk to. The other half I totally am. But I think like the ability to continue to go out and be a part of the discussion is my goal for that next step. So as we wrap the season up, we're hoping we get to do another one and get to tell more and more stories that we didn't get to tell this year.
Very good.
Thanks.
Cool. All right.
Hey,
Hello.
so many late night hosts and comedians have claimed that, that comedy doesn't really impact social change. So here you are with the series which seems to be all about social change and still manages to be extremely funny at times.
I don't know if we needed that, but all right, yeah.
Same line. So what's your take on that? What's your take on comedy impacting social change?
Well, I think comedy is a part of the conversation. And so I think comedians are often pretty hesitant about being put too high on a pedestal. They work better from below. But I would say, like, for me, I hear people go to The Daily Show to get some of their news or to check in. I think at the very least, comedy is a way to not feel alone, to feel connected. If you're laughing at something, you're probably checking in with the point of view that somebody else has. And if you tune into a late night show and you're laughing at that joke, that thing that you read alone on your phone and now somebody's also sees it as bullshit in the same way, I think that at least can provide you a little bit of a community in that sense. Now, what you do with that, I think some comedy is looking to arm you with inspiration, is looking to arm you with information. Some shows do that more than others. I think everything's a part of the conversation. I think you have to own what you are doing, what you're putting out there. The purpose of this series was not to activate people to, you need to go be an activist, you need to care about this. I would like people to care more. And hopefully in doing that, you do something with it. I don't know if it's the role of the comedian to force somebody to be an activist, but I think the comedian should own that you're a part of the conversation, so be aware of what you're saying.
Absolutely, thank you.
So thanks.
So there's this skill that folks who have been on The Daily Show all seem to have, and you seem to be particularly good at it, which is the impromptu interview out in the field. that where clearly the person you're speaking to has a very different experience with the audience experiences. But I've always been very impressed that this is sort of something that people who go on the Daily Show and spend some time there seem to pick up this skill. And what I've always wanted to understand is, how do you learn how to do that? It seems really hard because you're create a situation where the person you're talking to really has no idea that there's a sort of underlying comedy bit, but everyone's laughing once they watch the video later. And I wonder, like, do you talk to the other correspondents? Is there like a do they give practice sessions?
Well, yeah, it's how to win one over with the correspondents. I think what I come from the world of improv, and a lot of the correspondents do, which I think the number one rule there is listen. Like when I go out to the field, again, my work at the Daily Show is a little different than what this is here, but I think going out in the field, I go out with a point of view and an understanding of a topic, and I think that I might want to get across. And then you listen to people. I think you'd be surprised how surprised how you could wield other people's words against them if you really pay attention to the things that they are saying. And I think more often than not, people get caught in a feedback loop of bullshit that they hear somewhere else. And I think if you study that feedback loop, you can feed it right back at that person. And they're just so used to the way in which they're digesting it, they don't know what you're doing. Also, I've often said, I have a very Midwestern face. And way about me, and I think that's very trustworthy, which could be very dangerous for some people. And so I think like a part of it is that's half joking but half true. A guy with a camera and a microphone is somebody who has authority and is treated in a very specific way, and so sometimes you're able to speak in a way that people hear as authority and don't hear as levity. And yes, we practice it about once a week in a little circle. All the correspondents come together, we do a little zip, zap, zop, and then Ed Helms leads us in prayer. Thanks.
Awesome. So I think we have time for two more. Go for it.
Related to this question in a way, like you said that people kind of like go to rallies to like more for affirmation rather than hearing ideas of judging something critically, and that they're stuck in this feedback loop in their own head. Like, what is your take on why and why you're not trying to get somebody out of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, have you guys ever been to a Trump rally? What's that? You should go. You totally should go. Wear armor, but go. No, they're fun. Like, you go, they're fun. They're like a sporting event. And I think, like, honestly, you see that, and I think people want community. And you go to a small town in America. I'm from a small town in America. But you go to a little town out in the middle of nowhere, and Donald Trump comes to town. The President of the United States comes to town. And it's the biggest fucking event that's gonna happen in that town all year. It's a parade. It's essentially a parade. If your team won the championship and they're having a big parade, you would show up. And so what happens at the parade? Everybody puts on their parade best, their colors, their team gear. They put on, if it's the Eagles winning, everybody's wearing their Eagle hats, their Eagle shirts, their Eagle pennants. They go, they celebrate, they sing the fight song, they high five, they drink beforehand, they talk after. That's what a Trump rally feels like. He's better at that than everybody else. Now, should he be doing it in that way? No, it's manipulative. But he plays the hits. He says, build the wall, and you chant. You don't think about what that means. Some people might, but most people are there to play the hits. He plays the crowd like that. They line up. I'm watching news this morning. People have been lining up for 2 days because of the rally he's in Florida. And so I think, again, whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But it is a thing. And so I think some people get caught in the importance of politics and assuming everybody has the same relationship with politics and news. And they don't necessarily. A lot of people I see at the rallies, what have you, have a relationship with the event and with the community that the event creates. Now, when you have a crowd like that, it's a really powerful thing, and that's where dictatorships can come from, I think, then demagoguery. But you can't belittle somebody for wanting to be a part of something. I think that's something I empathize with. You want to be a part of a community? You want to put on your team colors and cheer? Yes. I do the exact same thing with Michigan football. And you know what I do with Michigan football? I hate Notre Dame. I hate Notre Dame, irrationally. Totally irrationally. I hate Ohio State. People from Ohio, my dad talks shit about people from Ohio because you're supposed to when you're a Michigan Wolverine fan. He knows that that's idiotic, that it's just this weird rampant tribalism that we have, that we feel good putting on a Michigan hat and going and singing the victors. But I think that's almost inherent in us. And so it doesn't make you a monster because you go to that rallies. It's just the person who's wielding the power of that rallies who's dangerous.
Hi.
How's it going?
So political comedy seems to be largely comprised of the left making fun of the right. But when the right does the same thing, it's often seen as controversial and offensive, and I would agree that a lot of the time it is. But do you think some kind of double standard might exist between the way the two sides of the political spectrum can make fun of each other?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic. I think sometimes folks on the right have a hard time because comedy doesn't tend to be funny when it's punching down. And a white guy on stage with a microphone and attention making fun of people who want to come in this country or people who are different, who are minorities, turns out not a great comedy formula. And so I think a lot of it comes from that, where people are like, why? I'm funny too. Why am I getting shit on like this? It's like, because you're punching down. You're a person in a position of power who's trying to poke holes and make fun of people who don't have power and don't have a voice. I think often comedy as a weapon that I'm interested in is punching up. It's trying to point out hypocrisies and speak for people who don't have a voice. That has empathy and it has bite. I think the right often has bite. I think you're missing a big part of that equation.
Jordan, thank you again so much for coming. This
Thank you.
was fantastic. The finale episode of Klepper is airing this Thursday, June 20th on Comedy Central at 11:30. And if you missed any episodes, you can go online or to the Comedy Central app and find them there. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.